And the day of Arafah is the day of fasting and also dua, right? Those are the two things that we're encouraged to do. So I thought, let's just skip over to the chapter of dua, inshallah, so we can cover as much as possible. It's a very long chapter, so I'll try to pick the most relevant ahadith to us to kind of encourage us to make more dua, inshallah. So this chapter, Imam Bukhari begins with a dua of the Prophet ﷺ himself. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh said, in the morning, the Prophet ﷺ used to say this dua, أصبحنا وأصبح الملك لله والحمد لله لا إله إلا أنت لا إله إلا الله وإليه النشور. And in the evening he would say, أمسينا. So أصبحنا means the morning has come upon us. أمسينا means the evening has come upon us. So أمسينا وأمسى الملك لله والحمد لله لا إله إلا الله وإليه النشور. So the Prophet ﷺ would say that we have reached the morning and dominion belongs to God. All praise be to God who has no partner. There is no deity other than God, and to him we all shall be resurrected. And the evening, he would say the same thing about the evening. So he mentions this dua to kind of emphasize the power of Allah, right? Because there were many, many different du'as Prophet ﷺ would say during the morning and evening. But he specifically mentions this one, because it talks about the power of Allah and it reminds you about the hereafter. So he mentions this. The next hadith, Abu Hurairah reports, he says the Prophet ﷺ said that the nobleman, son of the nobleman, son of the nobleman, son of the nobleman. So he says this 4 times. And he says Yusuf, the son of Yaqub, the son of Ishaq, the son of Ibrahim, the friend of God, the Lord of grace, the blessed and exalted. So the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning the lineage of Ibrahim alayhi salam here, right? Because we know Ibrahim's son was Ishaq, and then from Ishaq came Yaqub, and then came Yusuf alayhi salam. So we have 4 generations of prophets, right? The Prophet ﷺ is talking about them, and then he says, if I had remained in prison as long as Yusuf alayhi salam had remained in prison, then when the invitation came to me that I was about to be released, I would have said yes, right? So I'm going to just reiterate the story a little bit. So Yusuf alayhi salam, he went to prison for what? Do we know what he went to prison for? The wife of who? Yeah, the governor's wife. Yeah, Zulaykha. So Zulaykha had tried to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam, right? And he said, I don't want to do this, so prison is better for me, right? In the Quran, he said, prison is better for me. So he goes to prison while he's innocent, and he's there for a number of years. So, yes, more than 20 years, more than 20 years. He's in prison, and then he meets these 2 people, right, who also come to prison. And he starts giving them da'wah. He starts teaching them about Islam, teaching about Allah. And he says to one of them that, okay, I will interpret your dreams for you, but in return, when you go to the king, you have to mention my name, because I'm basically forgotten here, right? Like, he's been there for so long. So one of them, he's executed, so he's not able to tell the dreams. I'm summarizing right now. The other guy, he's not executed, but he becomes a servant of the king of Egypt at the time. So he becomes a servant. So he promises Yusuf alayhi salam that I'm going to mention your name to the king, so you can get out of here, basically, right? Because you're innocent. And he forgets. He gets used to the freedom and being his daily life. He forgets until the king has a dream, right? Allah gives the king a dream. In the dream, he sees 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows. And the interpretation, he's getting the dream is very disturbing to him. When he sees these fat cows and skinny cows, it's driving him crazy because he's having the dream over and over and over again. So then he thinks, okay, what should I do? So he calls all his, advisors, and he says, do any of you guys know dream interpretation? And that's when the servant realizes, the prisoner, he's like, oh, wait a second, I know somebody who knows how to interpret dreams. So he's like, his name is Yusuf. So then the king says, okay, basically release him, right? We need to go get him. So Yusuf alayhi salam, imagine you've been in prison for more than 20 years. Now you're about to be released. What would we do? We would just go, right? Oh my God, finally, freedom. Yusuf alayhi salam says, I'm not going to get out of here until you guys speak to Zulaykha, until my innocence is established. That's his concern. His concern is not getting out of prison. His concern is, I want to be shown to the world as innocent because I didn't do anything wrong. So what the Prophet ﷺ is saying here is that if I was Yusuf and I was in that position, I wouldn't have waited to prove my innocence. I would have just left. But the commentary, what they mentioned here, is that do we think the Prophet ﷺ would actually do that though? Like, would the Prophet ﷺ actually rush out of prison if that was actually him? And the answer is no, right? Knowing the Prophet ﷺ, he would actually also make sure that his innocence is established before he leaves prison, right? So what he's doing here is that he's praising Yusuf alayhi salam in such a way and kind of like humbling himself. Because when the Prophet ﷺ praises someone else, he doesn't want to praise himself, right? Because Allah is the one who has praised Rasulullah ﷺ, but he never praises himself. And that's part of the humility. It's part of the honor that Allah has given him, that he doesn't like self-praise, right? And we see that in others as well. Like sometimes if we find ourselves praising ourselves, it feels a little bit not good, right? It doesn't feel good. Like the nafs might feel good, the ego feels good, but your ruh, it tells you like, oh, something's off. Like you shouldn't be praising yourself. It's not a good thing, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he uses this example to kind of just say that Yusuf did better than what I would do, even though we know that's not the case. And the second example he mentions is Lut alayhi salam. So he mentions a dua. It's kind of like a dua, but he's saying it to his people, but he means to say it to Allah. So he said, would that I had the strength to defeat you, or that I could lean on mighty support. So Lut alayhi salam, he was not a prophet who enjoyed prestige among his people, right? Like we know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before Islam came, what was his reputation in Mecca? Amin, as-Sadiq al-Amin, right? So the Prophet ﷺ was one of those prophets who enjoyed a high station in Mecca before Islam. But Lut alayhi salam, he was one of those prophets who he wasn't well respected. People didn't really care about who he was. He was kind of like just obscure amongst his people. So when the message came and he had to preach to his people, what happened? It became worse, right? They started accusing Lut alayhi salam and his daughters, because daughters were righteous. And these were the people who were engaged in homosexuality, right? So they accused Lut alayhi salam and his daughters of being like prudes. Oh, you guys are calling us to purity. We don't want to do that. So Lut alayhi salam said that if only I had the strength to defeat you, right? But what's pointed out here is that the only support that Lut alayhi salam had was Allah. And that was essentially enough. So even when you don't have people surrounding you, when you find yourself in a situation where everybody's against you and Allah's on your side, you have everybody that you need, right? You have everything that you need. So Lut alayhi salam, we do know that Allah did come to his support and Allah destroyed the people of his nation. So the Prophet ﷺ is basically mentioning this incident to show us that Allah gives support to every prophet of his that makes dua to him, right? And the precedence that we have in the Quran is that we have all these stories of the prophets and we have all the du'as that they made, right? So that's why this chapter is beginning with one of the du'as of the Prophet ﷺ himself, and then two of the du'as made by the prophets, like Yusuf alayhi salam and Lut alayhi salam. Because we have many, many more examples in the Quran to look to. Okay, they're just talking about the Prophet's humility again. Okay, so which prayer is answered? We know that we're supposed to make dua, right? But how do we know the etiquettes of making dua? How do we know when our dua is being accepted, when our dua is not being accepted? So we have this story. It's an athar. An athar is a narration by a sahabi, right? We mentioned this before. Hadith is by the Prophet ﷺ, and when it says athar, it's by one of the sahabi. So Abdurrahman ibn Yazid said, Al-Rabi' used to go to Alqama every Friday, who was a tabi'i. And he would say, have you heard what Al-Rabi' said? And he said, do you wonder how often people pray and how little of their prayers are answered? So these are two tabi'is talking to each other. And they're saying, how often do people make dua? And the du'as are not even being answered. So they're kind of wondering about this, like, why is this happening? Like, people are making dua left and right, and we are not seeing that they're being answered. So what's going on? And he says, so Abdullah bin Mas'ud was there. Abdurrahman is saying that I heard Abdullah bin Mas'ud say that God does not listen to someone who prays to him so that people should hear him. So that's one of the things. So if you're making dua in public and your intention is like, I want people to hear me, your dua is not going to be answered. Or the one who's showing off. So it's kind of similar. Or the one who plays, i.e. the one who's not serious. So if you're like making dua and your mind is wandering, if you're not paying attention to what you're saying, if you're just reading from a book but you're like, your mind is not there, your heart is not there, that dua is not going to be answered. So, and this is from Abdullah bin Mas'ud, which is actually a sahabi of the Prophet ﷺ. So the tabi'i is telling the other tabi'i what he heard from a sahabi. And then Then the other tabi'i said yes. So basically he remembered that yes, this is the case. This is exactly what happens. So we have confirmation here from two different tabi'is that when you make dua from an unmindful heart, from when your mind is not there and you're not sincere, your dua won't be answered. And the other thing is that we're not supposed to say inshallah in our du'as. So Abu Hurairah says that the Prophet ﷺ said, when any one of you makes a dua, he should not say if you wish. So like in shi'ta, right? You shouldn't add that to your dua, and you should not add inshallah. Because when you add inshallah, what is the implication? The implication is that you can like Allah has to, like Allah seeking permission from you almost, right? Because when we say inshallah, why do we say inshallah? Because we don't have the power to make it happen, right? If I say like, I'm going to go to the park tomorrow, inshallah. Why do I say inshallah as a human being? It's because I don't have the power to make it happen. But yes, Allah has. Exactly. And when we say inshallah, like, oh Allah forgive me, inshallah, like that's, like you're giving Allah permission now, right? So it's bad adab with Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ said that none of you can make Allah do something against his will. So it's bad adab. So we don't say inshallah when we make dua. And the Prophet ﷺ said, what should you say instead? You should be firm and decisive in your asking. And you should show this like eagerness, like a child. You know the way a child begs their parents? Like, oh, please, 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 can I have this? Like that. We should be begging Allah, showing that earnestness, showing Allah how much we're in need, and give it, make dua with conviction, with yaqeen, that Allah is going to answer you. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said, Ud'u Allah wa antum muqinuna bil ijaba. Ask Allah and be certain, like have yaqeen that Allah is going to answer you. Okay, so there's two narrations that said the same thing. There's a lot of repetition in this book, so if you see me skipping, it's because of the repetition. Yes, go ahead.
If you ask, should you ask as if you do deserve it and you want it, like okay, let's say, you want to go, okay, or do you say it if I deserve it, or if it's something that's kind of like good for me, for example, like meaning expecting to that you will get it. Do you know what?
Those are three different things you mentioned.
Yeah. So like the way you ask is kind of like, okay, you're asking and then you expect it to happen because Allah has the power to give it.
Yes.
So because Allah has the power, you're kind of like, okay, when a child says, take me to my friend's house, they already expect me. Like, when I go to my friend's house, 5 o'clock
Yeah.
for a play date or whatever.
Yeah.
And they automatically assume that it's going to happen, so they're already getting ready for it. Or is it like, oh, please give it to me, and I'm going to try to be good for, and
Yeah.
And within my heart, I'm good, so I deserve it, so I should
Get it?
get it, and I'm going to assume that I am going to get it. I don't know if that explains what I'm trying to say. Kind of like, because you said be strong about it.
Yes. So when I say be strong about it, I mean be insistent, be persistent. Don't stop asking. Yaqeen is mentioned specifically in the hadith because yaqeen we all understand, because we all have yaqeen in the hereafter, for example, right? We know that we're going to either go to Jannah or we're going to go to hell. Is there any one of us who has a doubt about that? We don't, right? We don't. I mean, if we do, we can have a separate conversation about that. That would be somebody having a spiritual crisis, right? But I'm saying for the healthy Muslim who's not having a crisis, we believe that we are going to go to Jannah or hell. There's no question about it. Like death, for example. We all have yaqeen that death is going to come, right? The Prophet ﷺ used the word yaqeen for dua because he's telling you that you must have yaqeen that your dua will be answered. Now, the way it gets answered is different, right? We can talk about that. It'll come later, inshallah. But what you're asking, since you mentioned deserving, there's a difference between feeling worthy and feeling deserving, okay? So just by the fact that I am a servant of Allah and I'm asking Him, I am worthy. Allah has already made us worthy. We all have self-worth. We have the worth that Allah gave us because He gave us iman. He made us human. We all have that worth. But deserving becomes a little bit tricky because it goes into entitlement, right? I can't think that I deserve something because I actually don't. We don't deserve anything. Like the fact that Allah gave us Islam, we didn't deserve Islam. We didn't do anything for it, right? Like we're Muslim, but what did we do? We didn't ask Allah for Islam, but we just got it. So Imam al-Shafi'i, he used to say that, Ya Allah, just the way that you gave me Islam and I did not ask you for it, give me al-Firdaus and I'm asking you for it. Right? That was a dua he used to make often. It was well known. So what he's saying is that, Ya Allah, I was nothing, but you gave me Islam. But now I'm earnestly asking you for al-Firdaus, even while knowing that I might not deserve it. Right? So you're actually supposed to make du'as that you feel you don't deserve, because the moment you think you deserve it, you're not in that state of humility anymore. And that's the goal of du'a, actually. The goal of du'a is not necessarily to get what you want, but the goal is to become the person that Allah wants you to be, to have that relationship with Him. Now, the way the du'a gets answered, either Allah gives it to you, or He keeps it for the hereafter, or He gives you something better, right? Or He'll protect you from a calamity. So those are the ways in which du'as get accepted. Does that answer your question? Okay. If it continues, you can ask again, inshallah. I can explain more. There was a time when there was a tabi'i, Abu Nu'aym Wahab. He said that I saw Ibn Umar, who's a sahabi, and I saw Ibn Zubayr supplicating, like making dua to Allah, and then wiping their faces like this, right? So we have this, some people have a misconception that wiping your face after dua is a bid'ah, but it's not, because it's mentioned over here. And the Prophet ﷺ himself, he said, when a servant raises their hands to Allah, Allah is shy to return them empty, right? So the Prophet ﷺ would raise his hands. Sometimes he would raise them up to his chest, sometimes up to his shoulders, sometimes up to his face, to the point where before the Battle of Badr, right, the Prophet ﷺ was crying and making dua so much that he raised his hands like this. He was wearing a shawl, and the shawl fell off his shoulders, right? So he was raising his hands that much up to the sky and crying, weeping to Allah to give victory to the believers in Badr, to the point where he was soaked in tears and his shawl fell. And then Abu Bakr came from the back, and he put the shawl back on his shoulders, and he said, Rasulullah, Allah has heard you. Right? So he was comforting the Prophet ﷺ that it's okay, Allah has heard you, because he was crying so much. So the thing is with dua, we're not supposed to make dua like this, from the back of our hand. We're supposed to make dua like this. So the palm, so whether you put your hands together or you go like this, that's okay. We have that variation. So you know, in salah, some people in witr, they go like this or they go like this, that's okay. The Prophet ﷺ did both. In different ahadith, he's mentioned doing both. But we don't want to make dua like this. You want to keep your hands open like a beggar. And then the Prophet ﷺ himself, the Sahaba saw him going like this after he made his dua. And then Aisha has said that I saw the Prophet ﷺ having raised his hands and supplicating, and he said, I am only human. If I ever harm or curse any believer, please do not punish me for this. Interesting dua, right? Because would the Prophet ﷺ ever curse a believer? Can we imagine him ever cursing a believer? Or saying any, like harming a believer, hurting them? So we know that sometimes the Prophet ﷺ did things to teach us, right? How to make dua, what to say in our duas, how to teach us how to treat each other. So he would do things, ﷺ, that don't necessarily apply to him, but he would do them anyway in order to teach us, because he's our teacher. So he made this dua so that we could make this dua, right? Because I'm sure we have harmed people, we have hurt people, we have cursed someone in a moment of anger, right? So we should be asking for forgiveness from Allah, that Allah, don't punish me if I have harmed one of your servants, if I have hurt one of your servants. So this is a dua he would make. The other reason he made this dua is because he's the Prophet ﷺ, and if he even accidentally made a dua against someone, they would be destroyed, right? There's no way that Allah is not going to answer the dua of the Prophet ﷺ. So if he accidentally even ever made a mistake and he said something against someone, he didn't want Allah to punish that person. So he said, Ya Allah, please do not punish me, and I'm only human, right? There was a time when the Prophet ﷺ was checking the soldiers before battle, right? So all the Sahaba were lined up, and he was checking them, checking the armor, seeing if they're strong enough, fixing the rows, the lines. And so he basically had poked somebody a little bit with his stick. Like he was using the stick to kind of line them up, right? And he had poked somebody on the chest. So later, this Sahabi said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to take revenge. And Rasulullah is like, okay, anyone can take revenge from me. It's okay. And the Sahaba are like, what is he talking about? Like, how dare you take revenge from the Prophet ﷺ, right? This is such a shocking thing to say, right? It's bad adab. So then the Prophet ﷺ is like, okay, so he said, what do you want to do? He said, you poked me that day, on the day of the battle. So now I want to hit your chest back. And the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, go ahead. He said, no, that day I wasn't wearing a shirt. So I need you to remove your shirt, and then I'm going to hit you, then it's going to be equal. So the Prophet ﷺ he opens his shirt for him, and then he hugs him. And he starts kissing his chest. And he says, I just wanted the barakah of your body. Like the barakah of your, because the Prophet ﷺ is blessed, right? His skin, his sweat, his hair, his teeth, everything is blessed. So he said, I just wanted to touch your skin. So he kind of like used this like trick to kind of get the Prophet ﷺ to be close to him. And he smiled, ﷺ. He found the whole thing amusing. So this is one of the incidents where like somebody could use like, oh, the Prophet ﷺ, you did something against me, but it was like a joke. He just wanted to get close to him. ﷺ. There was a time when a Tufail, what's his name? Tufail ibn Amr al-Dawsi. So he was from the Daws tribe. So he was told by the Prophet ﷺ that go to your people and invite them to Islam, the whole tribe. So Tufail is like, well, it's going to be a little difficult. I can't really do this. But the Prophet ﷺ told him to do it, so he has to do it. So he goes back to his tribe. He teaches them about Islam and all this. And he comes back and he says, Ya Rasulullah, they all rejected me. They all said no. Nobody accepted Islam from my tribe. And then he said, so pray to God against them. He added this extra sentence. He said, pray to God against these people. And the Prophet ﷺ faced the Qibla and he lifted his hands, and Tufail thinking, yeah, now he's going to pray against them, right? And Rasulullah ﷺ says, my Lord, guide the Daws tribe and bring them into Islam. So he makes dua for them instead of against them. And later on, after during the Battle of Khaybar, and then during the conquest of Mecca, the entire tribe became Muslim, the Daws tribe. And then Anas radiallahu anhu, he reports that one year rain was so scarce, right? There was no rain. So some of the Muslims, they went to the Prophet ﷺ on a Friday. So during Jummah, they went to him and they said, please pray for us for rain because the land is hard and dry. Our cattle are dying, our animals are dying, our crops, everything. So the Prophet ﷺ raised his hands so high that you could see his armpits. Imagine how high you have to raise your hands for that, right? So people said that they could see the whiteness, meaning the part of his skin that had not been touched by sun, right? You know, certain parts of your body are lighter than others because there's no sun that touched it. So you could see the bottom of his armpits, ﷺ. That's how high he raised his hands. And then he barely finished making dua, and it started pouring in Medina. It started pouring so much that the people who lived even close to the masjid were worried that how are we going to get home after Jummah? Right? That's how much it started raining. And it rained for the whole week until the people came back the next Friday and they said, Ya Rasulullah, like, we need this rain to stop. Right? So then he did the same thing. He raised his hands, made dua, and then the rain started pouring again. The rain stopped. And then the Prophet ﷺ smiled and he said, how quickly like people change their minds, right? Like one week you want something and the next week you want something else, right? So he was like thinking about how quickly human beings are quick to change what they want, right? Their desires. And then he made the dua, our Lord, let it fall around us and not over us. Allahumma hawalayna wa la alayna, right? And then it started falling around the area surrounding Medina. So first it was in Medina, and then it started raining around the area surrounding Medina, and it stopped in Medina. So the reason why this is mentioned is because to show us that the Prophet ﷺ's du'as were answered almost immediately. And also that when the people came to him and they made a request of him, he was quick to respond to their request. Like the Prophet ﷺ is a busy man, right? He's the religious leader of Medina. He is the political leader of Medina. He has negotiations to make with the Jewish tribes. He has meetings to attend. He has, plans of warfare to talk to with his companions. He has to protect the people. On top of that, he has so many wives and families, right? Like so many children, his own children and the children of others he's taking care of. So he's a family man as well. Now, when we think of an important man, we think about how we have to make an appointment with them, right? Even with the imam at the masjid, you have to make an appointment, right? If you go to if you want to meet with your governor or your local representative of Fairfax County, you have to make an appointment with them. And we see how accessible the Prophet ﷺ is, right? People come to him, like, Ya Rasulullah, make dua for us. An individual comes to him, a group comes to him, the whole city comes to him, please make dua for us. And right then and there, he makes dua for them, right? He was that accessible to the people, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's something for us to learn, that no matter what position we are in, no matter who we are, we should make ourselves accessible to the people as much as possible. And he prayed, and this, from the story of Daus, right, we learn that the tribe of Daus, when Tufail said, make dua against my people, because he's frustrated, right? Like as a normal human being, he's frustrated with his people. But the Prophet ﷺ, he does not act only as a human being. He acts as Rasul ﷺ. So his job is to do what's in his people's best interest, right? Because he wants to protect their dunya and their akhirah. So he's never going to make a dua prematurely that's going to destroy a whole group of people. That's his mercy. So we should be following his footsteps as much as possible. Like there's a difference between making dua against someone who has hurt, like really harmed you, right? Like let's say somebody took your property or somebody harmed your family member. That's a case where you're allowed to make dua against the person, right? The scholars have allowed that. But if somebody hurt your feelings, should you go around making dua against them? No, it's a bad adab, right? Because we sometimes think that we're being harmed, but we're only being hurt. Like our feelings are being hurt, and we think like, oh, this person harmed me. But there's a difference between the two, right? So part of good adab is that you don't make dua against people prematurely, right? Or like for small things, like your feelings got hurt, you make dua against them. You know, somebody did like said something, they offended you, you make dua against them. We should not be doing that. The Prophet ﷺ never did that. Yeah, that's the best response. Yes, hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. Whatever dua you want to make for yourself, right? That's advisable. But you really want to not make dua against people. It's not encouraged. Then we have another dua the Prophet ﷺ made. So Anas ibn Malik, he reported that the Prophet ﷺ sought Allah's protection, and he said, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-kasal, wa a'udhu bika min al-jubun, wa a'udhu bika min al-haram, wa a'udhu bika min al-bukhl. So the first thing here mentioned is kasal, which is laziness, right? And there's different types of laziness. Laziness basically means that you have the ability to do something, but you don't want to do it. That's laziness, right? You have the resources, you're strong enough, you're healthy enough, but you just don't want to do it. That's laziness. So that's kasal in Arabic. And the Prophet ﷺ used to ask Allah for refuge from kasal. Because this is one of the qualities of the hypocrites. Because Allah mentions in the Quran that they stand up for prayer, but وَقَامُوا كُسَالَى, like they stand up with laziness. Like you can see it, even the way they're standing, like they're just very like almost about to fall over, right? They have to drag themselves to prayer, and they're about to fall over because of how much they hate praying. These are the actual hypocrites, the munafiq in the Quran. So if we find that in ourselves, we have to question ourselves, right? Like what's going on in my iman? Like is my iman not that strong anymore, that I'm finding it hard to take myself to prayer, right? Because we're supposed to go quickly and swiftly to salah. And if we become lazy in salah, something's going on inside, right? It's a quality of the hypocrites. So that's one of the reasons why he asked for protection from that. And we don't want to be included amongst those people, right? Because Allah basically talks badly about those people in the Quran, so we don't want to be included among those people. Cowardliness, yes.
So it's not laziness if you just don't have energy.
Yeah, that's not laziness. That's actually, in another dua, it's mentioned ajiz. That's ajiz, which is incapacity. So there's different variations of the same dua, but in this dua it's not mentioned. But in the other dua, the Prophet mentions, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ajzi wal-kasal. So ajiz is when you want to do something, but you don't have the capacity. So they're the opposite of each other. Kasal and ajiz are the opposite. This would be like the same thing you mentioned, like you want to get up and pray fajr, but like you're so like just, you're sick maybe, or you can't get out of bed. That's ajiz. So the Prophet used to ask forgiveness, protection from both, because it can affect your worship, right? Both of these things can affect your worship. In this dua specifically, we have al-jubn, which is cowardliness. So this prevents you from fighting your enemy. Like if you have a real enemy, it prevents you from fighting them. And it compels you to, like if somebody's trying to force you to do something and you're a cowardly person, you're going to do it, right? So there's cowardice is basically looked down upon in Islam, because if you're cowardly, you can't defend yourself. You can't defend your family. You can't defend your wealth. You can't fight against someone who's forcing you to do something. Peer pressure, right? There's a lot of kids who, some of them are more I guess, scared than others, and they're more likely to get pressured into like smoking or drinking or whatever it is, right? So for those who have kids should make sure that they teach their kids how to be brave. It's a very important quality for a Muslim to be brave, because you have to be able to say no, right? Saying no is, like, we think that being a nice person means saying yes to everybody all the time, being a people pleaser, right? But if you're a people pleaser and you don't know how to say no, then people can make you do bad things, right? We see this all the time. People can force you to do things you don't want to do, and that's not a quality that befits a believer. And then what happens as a result of cowardliness is that you're going to lose the respect of your community. You're going to lose the respect of your family, especially as a man, right? Like, there's no men here, but it's more important for a man to be brave, even more than it is for a woman. And then he says, well, to become haram, like anything haram. So the Prophet is asking, I want to be protected from falling into anything haram. And the last thing was al-bukhl, which is miserliness. So if a person is miserly, the number one thing that's not going to happen is that they're not going to pay zakat, right? Zakat is obligatory, it's fard. So if you're so stingy that you can't even pay your zakat, then you're digging a hole for yourself, right? The second thing, you're not going to pay sadaqah. Sadaqah is optional, but it's something that, there's so many ahadith about sadaqah, like it repels the anger of Allah. The Prophet said, be quick to give charity, because it repels the anger of Allah. It repels calamities as well. So if you're scared that someone's going to hurt you, something's going to happen to you, give sadaqah, even if it's like $1 every day, right? So if you're somebody who's stingy, then you're not going to give zakat, you're not going to give sadaqah, and then you're also not going to, like, if somebody comes to your house or whatever, you won't treat them well. Like, you're not going to give them enough food. Your hosting ability is reduced, right? Have you ever been to somebody's house and they don't even offer you water? Unfortunately, it happens, right? Like, they don't even offer you water, like not even tap water. It's kind of embarrassing, but like, you get secondhand embarrassment when they don't even offer you water. It's really bad, but it happens, right? And the Prophet ﷺ says that when you have a guest, you should be the most generous with them that you can. It doesn't mean that you go beyond your means, but at least if all you have is fruits, give them some fruits, right? Put some nuts on the table, some raisins, whatever. Like, every culture has their thing. You don't have to make a feast for them, but at the very least, give them water or tea or something, right? But there are people that stingy, believe it or not, that they don't even offer you water when you go to their house. And it's a bad quality. Okay, the next hadith is a hadith Qudsi, where the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah says, I am as my servant expects me to be. I am with him when he prays to me. It's a different variation of a longer hadith where Allah also says that I am as my servant expects me to be. Like, anything you expect from Allah, that's what he's going to give you. And it kind of goes to the question that you asked earlier, right? Like, what if I feel like I don't deserve something? So dua is not about who you are. Dua is about who Allah is. Okay, that's the key thing we have to remember about dua. Because none of us deserve what we already have, and none of us deserve what we're asking for. Like, who's to say that I deserve, like, a good job over, like, you, for example, right? Who is to say that I deserve a bigger house than you? Nobody can like, actually, determine that. None of us can determine who deserves something more than another person, right? So it's not about who we are. So this is kind of like, sometimes we hear about the law of attraction and like manifestation and stuff on social media. It's a very like non-Muslims, like you attract who you are and that kind of stuff. This is our law of attraction, basically, right? We don't believe that we make things happen. Like, we don't believe that we have the ability to change qadr, but dua has the ability to change qadr, right? So we take the focus off of ourselves and we put it back on Allah. And a lot of the dua blocks that we have, where we think like, can I even ask Allah for this? Should I ask Allah for this? All of that is from shaitan, right? Because shaitan's goal is to make you focus on yourself, right? So now you're doing dhikr of yourself. One of my teachers told me this, actually. He said, if you're thinking about your problems all the time, and you're thinking about your limitations all the time, are you doing dhikr of Allah, or are you doing dhikr of yourself? And it's just like changed my perspective on everything. Because you think that putting yourself down is righteousness, but it's not, because it's taking you away from Allah. But when you take the focus away from yourself, you put it back on Allah, then now you're actually worshiping Allah. Because dhikr means to remember, right? So we have to remember who Allah is. That's at the core of it. Before we can ask Allah, we have to remember who He is. We have to know who He is. Otherwise, who are you asking from, right? So you have to remember Allah's name is Al-Wasi', right? The vast. Everything that He does is vast. The blessings that He gives us is vast. His mercy encompasses everything, right? So there's a sense of expansion over there. But a lot of times when we make dua, we constrict ourselves. We limit ourselves. We think, how is this going to happen? How could it happen for me? I'm just little old me, right? I'm asking for asking for 10 grand months, in my business, but I don't have the skills. I don't have whatever it takes to do this. I don't deserve this. But Allah never told you to have any of those things, right? That's why we make dua, because Allah is the one who's able and we are not able, right? And when we make the dua of istikhara, what do we say? Allahumma inni astakhiruka bi'ilmika wa astaqdiruka biqudratika wa as'aluka min fadlika al-azim fa innaka taqdir wa la aqdir, right? You have the power to make qadr. I don't have the power to make qadr, right? وَتَعْلَمْ وَلَا أَعْلَمْ. You know and I don't know. So you're putting everything back to Allah. That's the key of dua. You focus on who Allah is, you focus on His names, and then you ask Him because you're not able to get it yourself. That's the goal of dua. Like, you constantly remind yourself. So this is how you turn your weakness into strength, right? Because we as humans are weak, right? And we focus on our weaknesses so much that we get down on ourselves. We become negative. But instead, when you take your weakness and you take it to Allah, it becomes your strength. Because you're telling Allah, I can't do it. That's why I need you to do it for me, right? I am in need of you. That's what Musa alayhi salam said. Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khairin faqir. My Lord, I am in need of whatever good you may give to me. Small good, big good, whatever, right? He's in the desert. He's just probably hoping at this point he's going to have some water to drink, right? Or some food, or like somebody to travel with, because he's in the desert alone, right? But what does Allah give him instead? Allah gives him a wife, right? Allah gives him a house, and Allah gives him a job. The three main things that you need to live, right? A companion, livelihood, and a place to stay. The three things you need. He gets all of those because he acknowledges to Allah that I am in need. So we are supposed to take ourselves to Allah broken in that same state, right? Okay, so how do we reconcile this hadith with people who, you know what, let's just put it on ourselves. Let's say I'm coming at I'm doing a lot of sins, right? I'm committing sins. And then I say, but Allah's the way that I expect Him to be. So Allah is Ghafurur Rahim, right? He's going to forgive me. Is that okay for me to do that? Okay, we have one no, one yes. Is it okay for me to be like, yeah, I'm a sinner, but like Allah is the most forgiving? Why not?
Because Allah has given us accountability for ourselves. Just because He's merciful, don't forget He's also the one who takes, not revenge, but the word is He takes justice.
Justice, yeah. Accounting.
Accountability.
Yeah. Exactly. So we have to make sure that our belief of Allah is aligned with our actions, right? Because if I'm continually committing sins and I'm not doing tawbah, and then I expect that Allah's just going to forgive me later, like I'm doing sins in my 20s and 30s, and then I'll go to Hajj when I'm 60, and then it'll be okay, right? That we cannot do. That the scholars have mentioned, it's as if you're making a mockery of Allah, right? Because you're doing whatever you want, and then you're like, yeah, I'll just go to Hajj when I'm old. But if you're constantly committing sins, but you're making tawbah constantly too, that's what Allah loves, right? Because Allah says, Inna Allah yuhibbu tawabin wa yuhibbu al-mutatahhirin, right? So Allah loves the tawabin. The tawabin are the ones who constantly make tawbah. And is there any one of us who does not constantly sin? We do, right? Even the small ones. Like, let's say we're lucky enough to stay away from the major sins. But we're still committing small sins all the time. We might miss a prayer here. We might say something to someone. We might hurt our parents' feelings. We might do something, right? So we're always saying and doing things that we're not supposed to be doing. So the only way to counter that is to become regular in tawbah. Because we are regular in sin. We should already assume that. All of us should be like, yeah, I commit sins regularly, therefore I need to make tawbah regularly. The Prophet ﷺ used to make tawbah 100 times a day, right? Istighfar, he would seek istighfar 100 times a day. So this statement, I am as my servant expects me to be. Now, you mentioned something really interesting in the child example, where you said, should the child now get ready and pretend that they're going to go to their friend's house that day, right? That's exactly what we're supposed to do. If you make dua for something, you should act like it's on its way. So there was a Sheikh Muhammad al-Sharif. He passed away, rahimahullah. He had this dua program called Visionaire, right? I'm a huge fan of that program. And Nadia, you know all about this. So what he did was he had a friend. The friend and his wife could not have kids for, I think, over 7 years of marriage, or 10 years, something like that. So the friend was like complaining to him. He's like, no, man, since the last time I saw you, I still don't have kids. Like, make dua for me, this and that. He said, okay, we're going to go somewhere together. And they go to the baby store. And he said, why are you bringing me to the baby store? I don't have kids. We've been struggling for 7 years. He says, we're going to buy the clothes because you have to make dua with certainty. And I don't hear the certainty in your voice right now. So he says, go ahead and buy an outfit. He's like, okay, boy or girl? He's like, what do you want? He said, you know what? I'm just going to buy both. I'm going to buy a boy outfit and a girl outfit because I don't know what Allah's going to give me. So the next year, when the sheikh meets with his friend, he says, so what happened? He said, we had twins. One boy and one girl. So that's the level of certainty that you want to have. So based off of this story, there were many, many students of Shaykh Muhammad who made dua in this way. And there were like more than 100 du'as that they shared with us in the course that people had accepted, right? Like people's du'as came true exactly the way they had asked. So some people, they would go out and buy their wedding dress, for example. Some people would actually just go live next to the job they want to have or something like that, right? So they're acting as if their dua is answered. Because when you're doing that, it's not delusion, by the way. Like, if you're like, this is so delusional, it's not. Because you're believing in Allah, not in yourself, right? This is not like the non-Muslim manifestation stuff, like, I'm going to act like it's happening so I can make it happen. No, you're showing Allah that I believe in you this much. Like, I'm doing this because I know you're going to give this to me, right? It's not entitlement. It's like that confidence that you have in Allah, the trust, the tawakkul. Like, you're completely relying on Allah, and you're saying, I know you're going to do this for me because I know who you are. And then you take that step. So you're showing Allah with your actions that you actually believe what you say you believe, right? That's what this basically says. And then we have a specific dua that we say when it comes to seeking Allah's forgiveness. And this is known as Sayyidul Istighfar. And Shaddad ibn Qais reports the Prophet ﷺ said that the best formula of seeking forgiveness is Allahumma anta rabbi la ilaha illa anta khalaqtani wa ana amatuk wa ana ala ahdika wa wa'dika mastata'at a'udhu bika min sharri ma sana'tu abu'u laka bi ni'matika alayya wa abu'u bi dhanbi faghfir li innahu la yaghfiru dhunuba illa ant. And there's two different variations of this, but very similar in meaning. And the basic meaning is, oh Allah, you are my Lord. There is no deity except you. You have created me, and I am your servant. So the men would say abduk, and as a woman we can say amatuk. I am your servant. I honor my covenant with you and my promise to you as much as I can. So you're telling Allah, I acknowledge that you created me, and I acknowledge that I have a covenant with you, meaning a deal. We have a deal with Allah, right? Anyone know what the deal is? What is the deal that we made with Allah? The wa'ad, yeah, the covenant. What was that promise that we made to Allah? Yeah, to submit tawheed, basically. And then what does He give us in return of that? So it's a two-way agreement, right? We say to Allah that we have submitted ourselves to you, and what does Allah give us in return? Jannah, right? There's multiple different references that we have to this. One reference is that in the alam al-arwah, right, in the world of souls, when all of us stood before Allah and Allah said, Alastu bi rabbikum, and we said, Bala, right? That's the first time we took the covenant. And then we have times when we renew the covenant, right? When, for example, the Sahaba stood under the pledge of, like the tree of Aqaba, and they took the pledge with the Prophet ﷺ, right? They put his hands and they said that we pledge to give our lives for your sake, right? For the sake of Allah. So Allah mentions that in the Quran. And He says Allah has purchased from the believers themselves and their lives, right? Meaning you yourself, your life, meaning the way you live your life, all of that. Allah has purchased it from you. And then number two, your wealth. Right? Allah has purchased from you your wealth and your lives. And in return, Allah's going to give you Jannah. That's why we say Sami'na wa ata'na, right? That's why when we want to do something which is the opposite of what Allah wants us to do, we do that instead, right? Because we choose Allah over our ego. We choose Allah over our nafs. That's what it means that we give up our life for Allah. It's not just referring to jihad or like, you fight in the way of Allah and all of that. We live our life for Allah. We don't just die for Allah. We live for Allah, right? So that's what this is talking about. When we're asking Allah for forgiveness, we're saying, Ya Allah, you are my Rabb. I acknowledge that you are my Rabb, right? You're my master, and I'm your slave. And then we acknowledge that I have this covenant with you. And then we're acknowledging that we broke the covenant, right? By committing sins, we broke this agreement between us and Allah because we did not honor it. We honored ourselves instead. So then we're saying, Ya Allah, I acknowledge your grace, meaning your forgiveness, and I confess, so forgive me, right? I think the end was, La ilaha illa anta. So there's no God but you. If you say this in the morning and you pass away, then you're a person of Jannah. And if you say this in the evening and you pass away, then you're also a person of Jannah. So we should add this dua to our morning and evening azkar that all of us should be doing. These are the azkar that Prophet ﷺ used to do after Fajr and after Asr. So we shouldn't actually wait until Maghrib. Maghrib is too late, right? Because a lot of those azkar are about protection as well. So you want to be protected from morning till evening. So it should be after Fajr and Asr. Okay. Abdullah bin Umar reports that we used to count in the assembly of the Prophet ﷺ that he would say 100 times, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي وَتُبْ عَلَيَّ إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ. My Lord, forgive me, and I repent to you, accept my repentance. Indeed, you are the one who accepts repentance, and you are the most merciful. And Aisha radiallahu anha said the same thing, that he used to repeat this 100 times every day. So it's a very specific dua, very specific azkar. Okay, so Ka'ab ibn Ujra said, a person who repeats what comes after prayer shall not be disappointed. So meaning this azkar we're supposed to say after prayer. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. We're supposed to say this 33 times after every salah. And there is an addition for la ilaha illallah here, although other narrations don't mention it. They only have subhanallah, alhamdulillah, allahu akbar. This is relevant to us right now as well, as we are in the first 10 days of the Al-Hijrah. So we should be increasing in these specific azkar as much as possible. It's like, just get the masbaha, count it, do whatever, set a goal for yourself to read this as much as possible. The other dua we're supposed to make on the day of Arafah, which will be on Saturday inshallah, is La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulk wa lahul hamd wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir, right? So try to repeat that as much as possible before. This chapter is super long and we only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to skip around to see what we can use to benefit us the most. It is the book. It's Adab Al-Mufrad. I skipped to the middle of the book to talk about dua because we're approaching Arafah. Yeah, so I skipped around. Next week we'll go back inshallah to our regular schedule. Yeah, and then Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he said that the supplication of a brother for another brother is answered, or sister in Islam. So when you make dua for someone, it's accepted, and it's based off of a hadith. Question? Does somebody have a question? Oh, no, no. Okay, so Abdullah bin Umar, he said, I supplicate for everything that I do, even that God make the stride of my mount wider so I may enjoy that. So like even his camel, to be comfortable, he asked Allah for that. So you should ask Allah for anything big or small, right? Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that we would ask Allah to, like if our sandal strap broke, right, like the leather sandals they would wear, if that broke, we would ask Allah to fix it for us or to replace the sandal for us. Though we might think, well, that's so small. Why would you make dua for your shoes? Just go buy new shoes, right? I mean, we could do that, right? Just chuck the shoes in the bin and go buy new shoes. Why are you going to ask Allah to replace your shoes? It's to show that you are not even capable of replacing your shoes unless Allah wants you to. It's that humility. At the heart of dua is that continuous reminder to ourselves that we are not capable of doing anything without Allah. If you think about it in terms of like self-esteem and stuff, a non-Muslim might come and say, but why do you want to remember your helplessness so much? Doesn't that go against having healthy self-esteem? Like, shouldn't I feel like I'm capable, right? Isn't it healthy to feel like I'm capable? Like logically, if we think about it, right? Huh? Exactly. But it's not that humility goes against capability, right? It's just that we have to constantly um, give the credit back to Allah. So if I think of myself like, yeah, I'm capable of doing this because Allah asked me to. I mean, because Allah gave me the ability, right? Or like you say, yeah, mashallah, I have the ability to feed 100 people, you know? This, like during these, the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, I'm going to feed 10, I mean, I'm going to feed 100 people. It's not because you have the ability. It's because you follow it up with saying, because Allah has given me the ability, right? So anything good you see in yourself, you give the credit back to Allah. So you can believe in yourself. That's not contradicting humility. But humility is that you always remember and you acknowledge and you mention that this is because of Allah. Right? In the Quran, one of the prophets, they say, هَذَا مِن فَضْلِ رَبِّي. Right? This is because of the fadl of my Lord. It's not because of me, it's because of Allah. Right? So we have that humility thing again. So yeah, ask Allah to make your car comfortable. Ask Allah to make your flight comfortable the next time you're traveling. Ask Allah for good food, right? If you're fasting, we're going to be fasting on Saturday, inshallah. Ask Allah for a good iftar, right? You should be asking Allah for these things. It kind of builds that very intimate relationship with Allah, right? You know, like the way your kids ask you, like, oh, mama, can we have pizza tonight? Or like, oh, can we do this tonight? Talk to Allah like that, right? We're just as helpless in front of Allah like the way a child is in front of their parents. Ask Allah, Ya Allah, I really want to eat Thai food tonight. Ya Allah, I really want to travel to Morocco this year. You know, we should talk to Allah like that. So make your dua list. I highly recommend make your dua list before Saturday comes around. There's another hadith. No, sorry, this is not a hadith. It's an athar. Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he would make this dua. He would say, our Lord, let peace... Okay, actually, I'm going to read it in Arabic. ربنا أصلح بيننا اهدنا سبيل السلام نجنا من ظلمات إلى النور اصرف عنا الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن بارك لنا في أسماعنا وأبصارنا وقلوبنا وأزواجنا وذرياتنا تب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم اجعلنا شاكرين لنعمتك مثنين بها قائلين بها وأتمها علينا. It's a very, very beautiful dua. He says, our Lord, let peace prevail between us. Put peace between our hearts. So it's very important for families, communities, right? Put peace between our hearts. Guide us along the path of Islam. Save us from the darkness and bring us into the light. Remove from us all lewd actions, whether visible or concealed, right? Because Allah knows what's in our heart. So if we have an evil intention, we're asking Allah, take it away. Bless us in our hearing, in our sight, in our hearts, in our spouse, in our offspring. Accept our repentance. For you are the one who accepts repentance, the ever merciful. Let us be thankful for your grace, ready to proclaim it and show gratitude for it. It's perfected for us. So we're saying to Allah that we want to see His blessings and we want to show proper gratitude for it and we want to acknowledge it, and we're asking Allah, perfect your blessings upon us. Like, don't leave even the tiniest bit out, right? And why would Allah leave His blessing out? Is it because He's not the Kareem? A'udhu billah. Why would Allah not perfect His blessing? What could cause that to happen? Sins, or wanting bad for somebody else when they don't deserve it, right? Making dua against somebody that when they don't deserve it. And actually, I don't know if it was an athar or a hadith, but when you make dua against someone and they don't deserve it, it comes back to you. That's the most dangerous thing about it. And when you make dua, of course, for someone in khair, the angels say Ameen, and you too, right? So we always want to make dua for people. And we want Allah to perfect His blessing. So the way Allah perfects His blessing is that the better you are to people, the better Allah is going to be to you, right? When you forgive others, Allah forgives you. When you're generous to others, Allah is going to be generous with you. So if you want Allah's blessing to be perfected upon you, you want to make sure that you're perfecting other people's rights, that you're giving them not just what they're due, but you do ihsan with them, right? We talked about ihsan a lot last week when we talked about parents, right? Respecting your parents is bare minimum, but ihsan is to go above and beyond, to fulfill their duties, to fulfill their rights as much as possible. So when you do ihsan, Allah will do ihsan to you, right? هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان, right? Amr ibn Hurayth, he said, my mother took me to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ stroked my head and prayed for my provisions to be plentiful. So this shows us that it's allowed to pray for rizq, more rizq, in dunya matters. It's allowed to ask for more money. And it's allowed to ask for money for other people as well, right? And then the Prophet ﷺ also made a dua for Anas ibn Malik. And he said, what was this dua for Anas? It was a very powerful dua. I don't remember the dua he made, but it was something about lengthening his life and giving him lots of children. So Anas ibn Malik had so many children that he buried a lot of them on his own. It was just incredible. I wish I could find that story. Okay, yes. The Prophet ﷺ said, "My Lord, give him plenty of money and children, prolong his life, and forgive him." So Anas ibn Malik was only 10 years old when he was brought to the Prophet ﷺ, right? And he served him until his teen years. So when the Prophet ﷺ made this dua, he said, so Anas was now talking when he was old, he was over 100 years old, and he was talking about this. And he said, "I have buried 103 of my offspring." 103 children and grandchildren he had. And he said, "I buried them with my own hands." And he said, "My fruits are harvested twice a year." You know, most fruits are harvested once a year, right? Most crops. He said, "My fruits are harvested twice a year, and I have lived so long that I feel embarrassed at this point." Like, he just wants to go back to Allah at this point. But he's like, of course, Prophet's dua is going to come true, right? So he lived over 100. And he said, "I hope for God's forgiveness." So he said, "I saw all of his du'as come true except the last part, which is Allah's ultimate forgiveness, right? Which he's not going to find out until the akhirah." So he says, every du'a the Prophet ﷺ made for me has come true to the point where I'm so embarrassed by it. But on the Day of Judgment, I hope that the last du'a is going to be fulfilled, inshallah. Which we know it will, right? Because Rasulullah ﷺ. And some people say that he lived 107 years. Yeah, there's so much that I can't even go into, but the Prophet ﷺ loved the parents of Anas. He came from a righteous family. He used to visit them often. He used to go have tea there, eat with them. He was very, very close to the family of Anas, to the point where they were almost like as if they were his relatives. Sulaim, the mother of Anas, had given a lot of sacrifices for Islam. She had sacrificed a lot of her personal family and her personal struggles. So the Prophet ﷺ recognized that, and he gave a lot of du'as to them. And Anas radiallahu anh was the servant of the Prophet ﷺ, but he treated him like a son. So he had that father-son type of relationship with him. So he was very pleased with him one day, and he gave him this du'a. So the fruits of that du'a came as a result. I'm just going to talk about one more thing. Do you guys mind if we go 5 minutes extra? Okay. So you know how normally farmers, when they plant the seeds, I don't even know, I'm not a farmer, but so usually you only harvest your crops once a year, right? Is that true? I don't even know. Is that like a thing? It's once a year, right? Like normally when farmers plant stuff, it's once a year. He's saying that my crops, they give fruit twice a year. Well, I don't know if it's literal, but it could mean that it's double. It could mean he has double the provision, or it could be literal. I don't know. They don't specify. Okay, they did specify. They said his fruit trees yielded twice every year. So instead of once, like everybody else, they had fruit once a year. He has it twice a year.
I thought he was referring to his kids somehow.
No. But he did have a lot of children and grandchildren. If you buried 103, how many did you have, right? Mashallah. But they also said that this is probably referring to a plague that happened during his time, and 75,000 people in the town died. So it's possible that a lot of his children and grandchildren died during that plague. But he had that many to begin with, which is impressive. I want to talk a little bit about the unanswered supplication, just so we don't do those things. Abu Hurairah reports the Prophet ﷺ said, "The supplication of any one of you is answered as long as he does not get impatient saying, 'I have prayed to God and my dua has not been answered.'" Right? So it's normal for us to feel doubt, right? It's normal for us to feel like, is Allah going to answer my dua in the way that I want? Because we know for sure it's going to get answered, right? We covered that. Either Allah's going to give you exactly what you want, or you'll get what you want but later, or he'll give it to you in the hereafter, or he'll prevent a calamity from coming your way. To the magnitude of the dua that you asked for. So let's say you ask for a big dua, protection, being cured from an illness. That's a big dua, right? In proportion, maybe Allah doesn't cure you, but He might protect you from a really big accident, right? That might have left you paralyzed. So the protection that Allah gives you when He doesn't give you exactly what you want is in proportion to the dua that you made, which encourages us to make really big duas, right? So it's normal for us to feel, okay, is my dua going to be answered? That's okay, but those words should not come on your tongue. Because if they do, that dua won't be answered, right? Huh? That I have made dua and my dua was not answered. Those words should not be said ever out loud to anybody. You should never say those. And it's really scary because people say it all the time, carelessly. I asked for this, I didn't get it. I asked for this, I didn't get it. Allah's saving it for you until you say those words. You don't want to say those words, ever, ever. Like, erase them from your dictionary. You always tell yourself, Allah is answering my du'as, I just don't know how. But in alam al-ghayb, right, we have the unseen world, right? You have to imagine and tell yourself with yaqeen that my du'as are being answered in the unseen world. I cannot see what's happening, but Allah is working behind the scenes. Yes?
Is it also, what about when? Like, maybe it's being answered later? So you said it is being answered, but in a different way?
Yeah.
Is it,
Or it could be the process. It could be happening in the process.
so like, you said about the disease, for example, maybe it will be cured 10 years later, not at the exact moment.
Yeah.
Is that also true? Like, it's not
Exactly.
It's also when as well?
Yeah. So the timing is up to Allah. Yeah. But what he's saying is like this hadith is about the hastiness that we have. We don't want to have that hastiness. Like, we never want to say, because the wording is interesting. He said the dua of any one of you is answered as long as he does not get impatient and say, I asked. So there is kind of there is an implication here that if you become impatient, your dua is not going to get answered, right? And I'm sure there's a difference of opinion.
Also, like, if someone says
Mhm.
it's not being answered, like maybe one is not being answered, maybe it hasn't yet to be answered.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's not that it has not.
Yeah.
Maybe you get to wait for it.
So yeah, you can say that. You can say like, I have not seen my dua being manifested in the way that I wanted. Because the word manifested is completely misunderstood. Like, in the dictionary, manifested just means to see something the way you want to see it in reality, right? Like, for example, the signs of iman are manifest when we wear our hijab. That's what manifest actually means. It just means to see something in real time. So you can say like, yeah, I made this dua. I did not see it manifested the way I asked for it, but I know Allah is working on it, right? Like, not working on it as in because He has to, but He's working on it because He's waiting for us to be ready, right? Allah doesn't need the time. Allah can give you what you want right now, but it's because the timing is probably not good for us. That's why. I'm going to end with a dua that the Prophet ﷺ made himself, because it's a very powerful dua. And it's known as a comprehensive dua. I don't even know where it went. It's not here, but it was here. I don't know where it went. But there was a time when Aisha radiallahu anha, she was praying. And she was making a really, really long dua. Like, she was taking her sweet time making dua. The Prophet ﷺ enters the house, and he wanted to ask her for something, like, get something from the house. But he was waiting and waiting and waiting for her to be done. And she wasn't hurrying, because, she was really enjoying her dua, mashallah, like, she was in it. And he told her that, yeah, Aisha, you should hasten in your dua. Like, don't take so long. Don't make such long duas. And then he taught her this dua. I can't find it, but if you type in on Google the comprehensive dua, and then you type in Aisha radiallahu anha, it should come. And it's basically where, like, the Prophet ﷺ is asking for, like, oh Allah, give me Jannah and give me the things that bring me closer to it. Protect me from hellfire. Protect me from the things that bring me closer to it. And then you add at the end, like, I seek whatever the Prophet ﷺ asked you for, and I seek protection from whatever the Rasul ﷺ sought protection from. So now the question is, are we not supposed to make long du'as, right? Is that what the hadith is saying? No. The hadith is saying that there's a specific time to be quick, because you don't want to inconvenience people, right? And there's a specific time when you're supposed to take your sweet time and make du'a, like tahajjud. Make du'a for an hour, 2 hours if you want, right? Arafah, the day of Arafah, the pilgrims are standing from like Dhuhr till Maghrib, and they're making du'a. And we also should be making du'a, like on Friday, on the day of Arafah, we should be making long du'as and making sure that we, cover all our bases. Make du'a for dunya, make du'a for akhirah, make du'a for your family, for your ummah, everything. So that's not what this hadith is for. But I would still say that read this du'a because it covers all the bases. And the Prophet ﷺ himself used to make this du'a. That's why it's a good one to have. All right, we'll end here. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati ma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.